These group of 20 nations represent 75% of global emissions. You and your team have been looking at what we know about sort of where the negotiations are at right now. What is on the table right now, and what is still needing to be ironed out?
Well, what we know is that the negotiators actually sat through the night trying to get some kind of progress from yesterday, where they seem to be very stuck. And what we know is they remain very stuck. The latest communique that we're seeing today still has no signs of progress, particularly around the issue of coal, because what you have is countries who are in very different stages of their development. Some countries are big producers of coal, some countries are big consumers of coal. And so they're all saying, well, we can't commit to the idea of phasing out our reliance on coal at home. We all have different kind of national circumstances that need to be taken into account. And so what we're hearing is that that's really where things are particularly stuck, and that countries like China, for example, and Russia are saying, well, we can't reduce our reliance on coal. We can't certainly take it to zero. So that's one area where there is still contention. The other one is really, can they all agree to commit to net zero by 2050? Countries are saying we may need an extra 10 years to do that. We have to be flexible. There can't be one rule for all these 20 nations and above when they go on to the COP summit in Glasgow. So what you're seeing is very different approaches, very different requirements, and as a result, things are pretty deadlocked here at the moment.
And Roz, considering what Annmarie just said specifically about President Biden, does he have any leg up in these negotiations, considering sort of what is happening here at home in the U.S., how things are stalled in Congress? I mean, is there anything that makes Biden potentially gives him the upper hand here in negotiating with these other countries?
Well, the interesting thing at this meeting, which is in slightly odd circumstances, is that some of the biggest leaders aren't actually showing up in person, including the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. And so, in fact, that might give Biden something of an advantage. He could come in here and say, well, those leaders have not shown up in person. I'm here with a big message, what America is willing to do. I'm willing to show leadership. We're going to take this one and show some leadership on it. So, if anything, this could be an opportunity for him if he plays his cards right to do that, even though he faces those difficulties at home. He can say, well, I'm here representing America and ready to discuss this as an open book with the other countries, and these other leaders are not here to do so. It all depends how he's going to phrase it when he turns up to that meeting that starts tomorrow.
Annmarie, what are you hearing on the ground?
Well, there's a number of issues regarding what Roz is talking about, and that is in the communique in terms of the climate language. The biggest things, of course, that Xi Jinping and President Vladimir Putin are not here. And these are countries that are really enslaved to fossil fuels in the sense. So getting those timings and dates on what they can agree upon is going to be very hard. What I'm hearing behind the scenes is that particularly China is offering a very big hurdle in terms of trying to nail down that climate language, as well as some other developing countries like India. Remember, it is much harder for some of these developing nations to ditch fossil fuels the same way that you are seeing countries like the United States try to embark on. But going into these meetings, not just climate is going to be a huge focus, also how does the G20 address the health problem, the pandemic? What does that look like out of the pandemic, not just on COVID-19 vaccines, but also an economic recovery? And then finally, I'd say, Jen, something that is really going to be at the forefront of tomorrow is going to be the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear talks. The president is going to be meeting with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Chancellor Angela Merkel, as well as French President Emmanuel Macron about how they restart those negotiations. But they are negotiating with a very different regime than the prior one. This is not the Rouhani government. This is a cleric government led by Ebrahim Raisi. You're dealing with a very hawkish foreign minister, Hossein Amir Abdollahian, and they are going to discuss how they are going to approach Iran tomorrow. That is something that's going to really dominate some of the headlines here.